Good morning. Welcome to the Solving Delivery Challenges for Building Supplies webinar, which Descartes is holding this morning. We're going to kick off here in a second, and hopefully everybody can see online the agenda here. We'll do introductions for our two main speakers, Alistair Charlton from SIG. We'll then have Albert van Roekel from Descartes. We'll do a Q&A at the end as well. We'll actually take questions online, so for those of you who have some questions, hopefully you'll be able to see you can submit questions online using the webinar tool. At the end of Alistair's section, we'll address any questions which have been registered and requested of Alistair, and then at the end of Albert's section, we'll do a sort of a wrap-up Q&A as well. So welcome this morning. We will be recording the session here live, so the webinar will be recorded. For those of you who registered and have used the link to join the webinar this morning, the recorded webinar will be available through the same link. For any of your colleagues, or if you lose that link, we will be putting the webinar onto our website as well, so it'll be on the Descartes website. So with that, we'll get started here, and introducing our first speaker here, Alistair. Alistair was, until very recently, was Supply Chain Director for SIG Distribution here in the UK. SIG Distribution comprises many of the main brands of SIG in the UK. And Alistair, prior to SIG, has worked in the buildings, merchants, construction sector for many years. He was previously Supply Chain Director at Jewson, which is part of the Saint-Gobain Group. He was Logistics Program Director at Aggregate Industries, and also worked at the Travis Perkins Group as the Director of Supply Chain Programs there. Alistair, in addition to sort of his supply chain and construction industry experience, he also has general experience in retail and business-to-business distribution, e-commerce and management consultancy, having worked with PA Consulting, Coopers & Lybrand, Woolworths in the past also. He's worked throughout Europe. He's the INSEAD MBA and a Cambridge Maths graduate. Alistair is now currently, having left SIG recently, he's working as an independent consultant and interim executive, senior advisor to Entropy. So with that, I will hand over to Alistair, and we'll move on to his presentation this morning.
Thanks, Paul. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction. And just to say that I left SIG last month, as many of you obviously in the building supplies industry know. SIG has been going through a lot of changes, and with the new chief exec joining earlier this year, after a few months, he'd done his analysis and decided that some pretty serious cost cutting was needed, and I was just one of the casualties of that, but no hard feelings. These things happen, so that's why I left last month. So yeah, my agenda, as you can see on the screen here, I'll give a brief introduction to SIG for those of you not familiar with the company. I'll describe why there was a need for change, not just in transport scheduling, but in wider supply chain change, and some of the principles behind the overall supply chain program. And then I'll focus some more on the challenges and opportunities of using route scheduling and Descartes, and the lessons learned and success factors from that. So SIG is a specialist distributor of building products across Europe, and our main markets were insulation in particular, exteriors and interiors. Our mission, fairly sort of familiar type of thing, but to deliver value and reliability and specialist knowledge, and I'll talk particularly about the value and reliability a little bit later. In terms of the actual products, I won't go through this slide. It's all going to be in the pack that you'll be able to see anyway. But insulation, can be very large, pallets of plasterboard, very heavy. It can also be very lightweight insulation materials. In terms of exteriors, which isn't part of SIG distribution, that's essentially roofing. Interiors products can be things like glass paneling, suspended ceilings. So these are products which must be in pristine condition because they are visible in the finished building. So quite a range of products that we are distributing. In terms of turnover, just to get a scale of the company, 2.5 billion turnover last year across Europe, over half of that in the UK, and SIG distribution is about 900 million pounds of turnover, so about 2/3 of the UK business. And SIG distribution itself has got many different operating brands within it. So you've got the kind of insulation interiors brands, some of those main product groupings, but also specialist things like drainage, construction accessories, fixings, and so on. And also some of those other brands to the right-hand side of the slide are even more specialist in their particular field. So some of our branches would just have only one or two brands and would be quite a focused branch. Others would have many different types of operating business within them and a very wide range of different products and of customer requirements. Some of the common features of customer requirements, though, which are be familiar again with many of you in this industry, are first of all that the products that we distribute vary enormously in size and weight. So you could have very, very tall pallets of insulation, which are very, very light. You could have very dense pallets of powdered plaster, which are very heavy, but also can be pierced and spread dust and so on all over the place, so need to be handled very carefully. But also we'll have construction accessories and fixings where very specialist small fixings are very valuable and yet need to be obviously handled accurately and well. The sites we deliver to, being construction sites, are often difficult locations. The addresses may be difficult to get absolutely accurately. There may be access controls and restrictions in terms of what vehicles can manoeuvre and get in there. And being construction sites, there's often a lot of congestion, and therefore there may be timed delivery windows. And in particular, a lot of customers would say deliver to us as early as possible. So a first drop was often a requirement. And then finally, because construction sites can be complex environments with many different contractors operating on the same site, sometimes operating with the same products, proof of delivery can be really important so that it's absolutely clear that you have delivered the products, because there are situations where literally one contractor can take off a pallet of product thinking it's for them and actually it's for a different contractor. So those are some of the elements that are a background to our delivery requirements. In terms of the need for change, I'm being sort of fairly frank here, but I'm not saying anything that's a sort of secret. SIG certainly, is not at the forefront of service and reliability. I think, to be honest, the whole industry is poor from my experience in it, compared to retail standards, which I've worked in the past. Availability, delivery, timeliness, and so on in the retail sector is just streets ahead, frankly, of anything in the building materials sector. And some of that is, the building materials sector is complex with products that may vary by project, but some of it is just simply the traditional way things are done. So the traditional way things were done in SIG was there really was a need to have better, more consistent, accurate operations. Reliability and service, frankly, in some measures was shocking, I feel. And as I say, SIG are not the worst by any means. And the complex branch formats means that if at least things are done consistently, that can really help in a business where every branch has got different characteristics. A feature that we had in SIG was that many branches really thought they were absolutely pushing their capacity. They thought they were loading their vehicles as fully as they possibly could. The warehouses couldn't cope with any more orders and flow through because they were absolutely at their limits. And frankly, this was a misperception. There was opportunity to add a lot more capacity, and that was part of the need for change. There was too much stock tying up working capital, and also just operating costs were too high because there were so many mistakes made that a delivery, instead of being made fully complete in one go, you'd find products were missed off. Things hadn't been ordered, an order had been taken, and the customer promised the next day, and then some of the product had to be delivered a day or two later. So you're often getting deliveries failed or split into two deliveries when, if you'd done it well first time, you would have done it in one delivery. And the sort of underlying factors behind all this, again, familiar types of things. You had very experienced people, but people who had really only ever worked in SIG. And while that's great in some respects, it does mean that they only know what they know and they can't bring any external perspective. There was an awful lot of knowledge in people's heads. They all used spreadsheets and their own different methods to manage things. Everyone was working hard. Everyone wanted to do the best for customers, but often that meant unnecessarily over-servicing customers. So all of this, ultimately, despite all the goodwill and trying to work hard, actually created a lot of inefficiency, it added costs, and it didn't deliver the best service. So clearly a lot of needs for change. So one of the principles when we came to develop an integrated supply chain strategy was how do we sort of balance what is done in the centre and done remotely and what is done in branches. And in general, and I think again it's common to the sector, builders, merchants and building distribution branches do have a more sort of personal and close relationship with customers. If a customer is building a particular construction project, they will need a particular range of products. So there's no use saying to that customer, oh, well, we don't stock that. You have to bring that product into stock for the duration of the project. So there is a need to have a lot of local control. So that was a kind of key principle, really, that you did need to leave the branches with local control, but centrally the supply chain team would deliver really effective tools, such as Descartes, to allow the branches to operate their businesses better. All of that, again, is around saying, let branches do what they need to do to serve their customers, but try and use consistent and accurate procedures so that everyone does things in the same way. If you can do that, you can get excellent customer service, and also if you can do things better, you can create capacity, which we talked about being an issue. So that led to a supply chain transformation program with 4 elements. The first of that was transport planning, which we'll obviously get into more detail now. But we also had a lot of work around warehouse layouts and how product flows through the warehouse. We put in much better inventory management and replenishment to bring down stocks and at the same time improve availability. And finally, we had a major culture change program, because if people didn't really address some of the fundamental flaws that I talked about before, we were not going to get adoption of other new ways of working. So that was a kind of an overview of the full supply chain program. And in terms of the transport side of the transport planning, what we used to do was that every branch would just totally plan manually. And just to give a feel for the size of branches, they could be up to 100,000 square feet. Our largest branch actually was 130,000 square feet. They would have fleets of 20, 25, even 30 vehicles, and these are HGVs, and they might be handling 150, even 200 orders per branch per day. And these orders, many of these orders will be coming in today for delivery tomorrow. So this is a very, very dynamic environment. It's absolutely the opposite to, say, a fixed supermarket distribution centre where there's 6 milk runs which are periodically adapted every few months. This is a very dynamic scheduling environment. And a problem with all this, and I'll cover some more detail shortly on that, is that the timing of the warehouse day, the timing of the branch day, was often really skewed to suit the transport planners and staff, rather than saying, well, what does the customer need? What does the business need to do? Let's work back from that. And again, we'll see a little bit more of that later on. And finally, I skipped that point. In terms of the actual manual scheduling, another problem with that manual route scheduling was that there was a lot of manual judgment needed, because products didn't have volumetric or weight data. People didn't even know when they were planning deliveries, would product be here in time? So do you leave space for the full order, or do you think some of that product won't actually arrive in time? And this is where there was a lot of manual judgment needed. So when we came to the supply chain transformation project, we wanted to implement vehicle scheduling to generate routes much more quickly, automatically and easily, to save time for the transport planners, so that then the planners could use their expertise to review and adjust the schedule rather than trying to generate the whole schedule from the start. As I mentioned, there were a lot of flaws in the processes, and in particular in the sales processes. We realized that what the transport scheduling system has to work on is the sales orders. And if the sales orders are incomplete in some way, then you've got poor data in means poor data out. So we ended up developing quite a lot of changes to the sales processes as well. So in terms of benefits, what we were looking to achieve, and what we did achieve in the first branches that really embedded Descartes, was more efficient use of vehicles. And the good news about that was that as soon as we got more efficiency, that instantly turned into cost saving, because every branch, every day, was using couriers, hire vehicles, etc., to cope with the overflow of work, which they couldn't handle on their main fleet. So this wasn't a case of having to wait a few months and be absolutely sure we can get rid of one of our vehicles and we will be all right. Straight away you were going to be getting benefit from having less couriers being needed day by day. The flip side of that was also the ability to create more capacity. So instead of saying to customers, by mid-morning, sorry, we can't deliver tomorrow for you because we're already full up, you've got more potential to say to those customers, yeah, that's fine, we can take your order, we will be able to deliver it tomorrow, you won't have to wait a few days. And clearly that's good news for customer service. And finally, a real factor we hadn't anticipated when we put in Descartes was that it meant we had far fewer second runs. So in many branches, for many vehicles, they would just have a sort of attitude, oh, well, it's going to have to come back and reload anyway, so we might as well sort of load it about 2/3 full, and then it will come back at sort of late morning and load up again, and by then it might only load up half full, and then we'll send it out for a second run, and that will be its day. What we found with Descartes is it could really pack an awful lot more into a vehicle than people thought would be possible, and therefore the vehicles could go out at 7:30 in the morning and not come back till 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon after a full day of deliveries, having avoided that stem mileage to come back again to branch, and also the congestion in the branch. So really, if you can send all your vehicles out for the whole day, it's really good news, because then the branch can get on largely with just focusing on next day's deliveries, rather than having an awful lot of second runs to pick and load during the course of the day. So those were some of the benefits we were getting. In terms of Descartes, obviously we went through quite a thorough system selection exercise, and the reasons we chose Descartes was that we really liked the functionality. We deliberately weren't trying to get the system which had the absolute maximum functionality of all systems. There are, I think, vehicle scheduling software out there which has got some additional features that Descartes doesn't have, but we felt that those systems just got really over complex to use. So that sort of leads on to the clarity, and we really like the clarity of the screens and the ease of use of Descartes. There's a lot of easy drag and drop. It's very visual and so on. So that was a real factor in the selection. It was important that we had European coverage, because we are a European business, and we wanted the potential that if we wanted to roll out route planning into other operating companies in the group, that we would feel confident that we could use Descartes. And finally, of course, cost came into it. I mean, we weren't looking for the absolute cheapest system, but equally, we wanted to feel we were getting a sensible balance of cost to justify the business case. Moving on to the challenges. So I've talked about some of the sort of background and sort of culture at SIG. So the challenges I'll talk about are split into people, process, and system. So in terms of people, I've already talked about the very deeply ingrained ways of working and this over-servicing of customers. Often branches would just sort of say, oh yes, to a customer, yeah, we'll always give you a first drop. They wouldn't say, well, do you want a first drop? When do you actually want this product? They would just say, oh yeah, don't worry, you'll have first drop. You're one of our best customers. And if you're giving them a first drop when they don't need it, and then another customer comes along and they really do want a first drop, you start to get in problems and hiring in extra vehicles and so on. There was this general culture also that I think people almost felt valued if they were constantly firefighting. The fact that half the fires shouldn't have been created in the first place was beside the point. They just felt, oh no, that's our business, we're always coping with things on the fly. And again, another final point there in terms of trying to implement this and get the whole sort of ways of working around using vehicle scheduling was a lot of examples of, oh well, what about when this happens? And there's a lot of rare examples of things that happened, years ago, always dreamt up as a reason not to do something, which is always frustrating. On the process side of things, I talked already about the inconsistent processes, and the fact that people just worked around stuff. And again, this is part of the reason for the culture change program, that people in branches just they really couldn't see that put a bit of extra effort in up front and do it properly the first time is going to ultimately save you time and give a much better customer service than constantly having to correct problems and go back to things again. So there are a lot of process issues, and some of these process issues then tied into the system side of things on our system, so not on the Descartes system. So the issue we had at SIG is that we had an ERP system, but it was far from being a tier 1 system. Now that wasn't an issue in functionality, but where it was an issue was that there just weren't the resources to, for example, develop the live interfaces we would have liked to have into Descartes, instead of them being kind of manually triggered interfaces. And the trouble about being a tier 2 system is it just meant you couldn't go out and get, a consultant who can work on developing an interface, because it just wasn't a widely used system. So that was a bit of a blockage in terms of some of the things we wanted to do. On the system side of things, I mentioned poor product data, and that was a real issue. It was a real gap, and it just, for whatever reason, culturally, relationships with suppliers, etc., it proved a very difficult nut to crack, that we just didn't seem to be able to get that data corrected and sorted out quickly. It took much longer than in other businesses I've worked in. And finally, an issue with the ERP system and the way it had been designed some years back. It had been designed to be super flexible, not to make people do things. So it meant it didn't enforce process. So, for example, you could take an order, no need to put a postcode in, no need to select your vehicle type, no need to be precise on what delivery slots you wanted. So people were just lazy in the sales area because they weren't forced to do things properly. And that's where the transport planners would always use their judgment and say, oh, well, I know that normally that customer must be requiring that vehicle even though no one's put it. But it meant that if you're trying to use Descartes, clearly Descartes needs to know what vehicle type is required on the site, and it can't just assume that something is needed. So these were a lot of the challenges we had. And I think as a common feature when we came to put in Descartes was that it ended up shining a very sort of harsh light on a lot of dark corners of the business. There were a lot of things way beyond the pure vehicle planning that suddenly this highlighted were badly wrong, and that's why it was a difficult project in many ways. But equally, it delivered a much wider benefit in starting to change a lot of different ways of working in the business. So in terms of some of the lessons and success factors, you can sort of feel there's been quite a lot of sort of, need for analysis and facts versus emotion. And one example of this is, and I mentioned this before, was the working day. So this chart is something that we did for every branch, and people really found it an eye-opener, because what it shows is, at the time of day going along the horizontal axis, so from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening, at that time of day, how many of tomorrow's orders did you know about? Now, there was a real perception in the business that, SIG, we're a next day business, we're so responsive, we're so reactive, our customers are working on building sites, they never know what's happening day to day, therefore everything is next day. And yet, you can see on this chart that at 6 o'clock in the morning, i.e. when your day has started, you already know more than 75% of what you're going to deliver tomorrow. So this is very far from being a next day business. Yeah, there's a chunk of next day, but there's an awful lot of stuff that isn't next day. So there were some real eye-openers from that. But the other factor was that what was happening in a lot of branches is that the transport planners would get in early, because they like to be in early, and they'd be sitting down at 7 o'clock in the morning and then be saying, right, I'm going to do my scheduling now. I'm going to schedule all my routes, and I'm going to start issuing those pick instructions to the warehouse at 7:30 to be picking next day's deliveries. And you can see that actually if you hung on till 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, if you hang on till then, by then you know over 90% of your deliveries for tomorrow. So you can then build much more efficient schedules, and you've still got plenty of time to pick and load them. So this was one example where analysis really showed a very different picture to what people believed. It goes without saying that in a lot of projects like this, you do need the senior leadership, and certainly the board of SIGD were very much behind the route planning and indeed the much wider supply chain program. What we found, though, and this is just a cultural thing, for whatever reason, that support at the top level just didn't flow through down to branches, and there was a real failure, frankly, of sort of regional directors in being a lot stronger in leading through these projects. So that was something of an issue, a success factor in some respects at board level, but less so when it got down to branches. I talked about the need to look beyond the supply chain. So certainly the involvement of sales was very effective, and we did start to make a lot of changes in the sales processes to achieve better recording of orders and a better service, including making people take the orders live on the system rather than using a special order book, which is what a lot of people were using. And by using an order book, of course, they can't see live the latest stock position, and that's when you'd get into situations of taking an order and then finding that you didn't have the stock to make a delivery. So there are a lot of real fundamental things that we got into by looking into the sales area as well. Not rolling out too fast. I mean, unfortunately, we fell into that trap partly because budgets had been set before we even had selected the solution, and therefore aggressive budgets were put in with a very aggressive rollout, and we tried to keep up with that, and then found we did go too fast, and it was more successful when we scaled back a little bit and slowed things down. Giving evidence, obviously, as we started to get the first branches rolling out was powerful, and we did see 10% cost savings in some of those first branches. It did also give the ability to serve customers better, because having a very precise schedule generated by Descartes with precise estimated times of arrival at site meant that you had the potential to contact customers the evening before and say, your delivery is going to be along between 11 and 11:30 or between 11 and 12, and that would stop the phone call at 9 o'clock saying, where's my delivery? Again, this is a case where branches and leadership didn't, for whatever reason, decide to adopt the ability to do that. And I talked already that the program of culture change was very important, and that was a powerful success factor in helping people understand the need for change. So those were some of the key lessons and success factors, and then really just finally, where we got to. So SIGD, in those branches that have really adopted the supply chain change program, they have started to achieve very good improvement in supply chain, in cost and in service, and in an industry which frankly is a long way from world class. It does give a potential to be a really superior supplier to our customers. So a lot of potential, a real potential, not just for the tactical cost reduction and sales improvement, but a real chance for competitive advantage. And we're still relatively early in the journey, but certainly all the tools are proven, and ultimately it's really down to the leadership and adoption to drive that through, to make it work throughout the business, and that's kind of where we are. So my contact details are there. So obviously we've got questions and answers coming up now, but as Paul said, I am a little plug for myself. I am now independent. So if any of you want to contact me after this event, I'll be very happy to talk to you.
Very good. Thank you, Alistair. That was excellent, and I think you'll all agree that some very good insights into the operation of delivery in this sector and in this branch structure from Alistair there. And there are a few questions here, so what I'll do is I'll just ask Alistair to respond to a couple of these. I think there's a few quite similar, and then we'll move on to Albert's presentation. So actually the first one, Alistair, here is a general one in terms of e-commerce, and I think this is referring to the drive that we all see probably out there in particularly coming up to Black Friday and so on, the drive of e-commerce into the building supply sector. So the question is really around the role, what you see for the role of e-commerce and online retailing in the sector. So maybe you could just give a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, certainly SIG in its well publicised. It was all in our annual results and so on. I mean, did have a big ambition to bring in e-commerce, and invested a huge amount in developing a team and systems and the product data, etc. And just for various reasons, it got more and more complicated, and ultimately was put on hold. In other businesses, Travis Perkins, Jewson, I know that there was a lot of work going on. I think it definitely does have a place. I mean, we're all going to be in a world where, why should one sector not be offering e-commerce where in your private lives and in every other business-to-business sector you can use e-commerce? I think the challenge always is how ambitious do you make it to start with? And I think perhaps I would say that it's walk before you run. I think when you're in a distribution environment, builders, merchants, and so on, there are, and I remember working on this at Travis Perkins, there's so many different paths to fulfill an order. Will all the products be sitting in one branch? Will some of the products be in a central distribution centre? Will some of the products needed be in a neighbouring branch? Which branch fulfills it? Do you combine the whole order in one branch and then deliver it from that branch? So you get so many different permutations, and I think that's where things get really complicated. And I think, sometimes it's more successful where businesses have taken a view to say, if it's all in one branch, we'll fulfill the order. If it's not, it'll be handled manually by someone who's just going to have to manually look at each order and work out what to do with it. So I think there is a place for it because, increasingly construction is getting more digitized with all the different systems, BIM, etc., moving in there. So it's odd that you wouldn't be able to just tap on a tablet on site to place an order for a replenishment of some regular products going through and to manage all that on site. So I think there definitely is a place for it. In terms of the transport scheduling, in the environment of SIG, it wouldn't really change anything because it would simply be another order to be scheduled by the branch. So it would just add to the order pool really, and would be scheduled in the same way.
Okay, thank you. And in another somewhat related, I think, area here, the whole concept, Alistair, of being able to provide tracking information, where is the order, when is it going to arrive, and then related to that, a second question here on managing customers' expectation, how to manage customer expectations. So I think the question is about the use of tracking information, arrival, ETAs, and using those to manage customer expectations. Yeah. How significant is that?
I think absolutely, because in construction sites above all, as I say, many businesses like a supermarket receiving a vehicle, it wants to have its guys on the loading bay ready to receive a vehicle. But certainly in the construction sector, in very busy sites, accurate information on what's going on with your delivery is really important. So I think there, but I think there it's not just the supply chain's role; it's actually the sales role, and this was some of the such basic stuff. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to say it, but I mean the fact that we were just trying to get people routinely to say, look, when you take an order, take it online, take it on the system as you take the order. You can then confirm the availability of stock. You can therefore manage the customer's expectation. So if you haven't got all that stock, instead of saying, oh, yes, I'll deliver tomorrow, and then having to ring them later and say, well, I can deliver some of it tomorrow and the rest the following day, if you can manage that expectation there and then, you can be saying to them, here we are on Tuesday, I'm afraid I won't be able to deliver that tomorrow because we haven't got it in stock, but I'll get it ordered today. It'll be in our branch tomorrow afternoon, and I will deliver it to you on Thursday morning. Is that okay, Mr. Customer? Like that, you've managed it. The customer knows where they are, and probably, not always, but probably that'll be fine. Whereas obviously it's disappointing an expectation you've set, which is the kind of worst way of doing things. In terms of sort of tracking and so on, I think again, and I've been in other businesses that have done that. I think, will a site manager really have time to be looking at his iPad or his laptop or his phone to try and work out where 5 or 6 or 7 different deliveries from different suppliers are, all of whom are on a probably slightly different system? I'm not sure, but I think certainly some of the things that are done in the industry where you can trigger a text message, the evening before or the morning to say, your vehicle has left and you are scheduled to be between 11 and 12, and then an update when it's left the previous delivery to say, we will be with you in half an hour. That type of text message, I think, can be very effective because it's very easy for the site manager and gives him the information he needs or she needs without them needing to do the work of looking on a tracking system. So I think again it's always understanding what's the best for the environment, and I think construction sites are a busy and demanding environment where simple and concise information is probably more valuable than fancy interactive maps.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And then we'll just finish with one on a different topic here, which is more to do with the impact of change projects and implementations on sales. So was there an impact of the change you were introducing to the people in your branches and the demographics in terms of age and length of time with SIG? Did that have an impact on sort of the sales and I guess the atmosphere in the branch? I think is what the question is getting at.
Yeah. I know it's a good question, and I think being frank, it varied. I mean, there were some branches where it led to people leaving because they just But I think again, it shone this harsh light on some frankly bad practices that have been there for years. So people who kind of ultimately the branch manager and the regional director knew were poor and they weren't really up to scratch, and they'd just been allowed to just be there forever because no one could really face the disruption of trying to change things. Ultimately, the system in some ways, in some cases, did bring things to a head, and it meant that people either marched out and resigned in a huff, or basically they were kind of managed out and told, well, sorry, you don't seem to be able to perform now that we've got a more sophisticated way of doing things. So it did have an impact in some cases, but in other branches, I mean, our newly set up 130,000 square foot branch in the Northwest, which is our massive new flagship branch. Interestingly, there, where you had almost a totally new team, people were much better at adapting a more consistent way of working. They worked with the system and made the most success of it, even though it was the biggest branch of all with the biggest complexity. So I think change can always be disruptive, and I think change in very sort of deep-rooted traditional businesses is going to be more disruptive, and it's a bit of a cliche, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, but I think there's a bit of that here, and ultimately you just have to kind of work through a bit of tough times and get to a much better performance at the end of it. I think in hindsight, if we'd gone a bit slower and in a more slower way to really embed the first few sites, I think we would have reduced that disruption, and I think there were also, being frank, one or two issues we had in getting use of Descartes in an early period to really understand it fully. We did find some frustration in not having a pilot license to start getting going with for a few months while we were developing a lot of other stuff, and that frankly got in the way of some of the understanding and learning. But that's kind of water under the bridge. Okay.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much, Alistair. So I think we're going to move on here now to Albert's presentation. So thanks again, Alistair, for that presentation. Is excellent, and we'll pick up any further questions at the end of the session here this morning. So Albert Van Ruckel is going to present next, and Albert is a solution consultant with Descartes. He's got many years of experience in the scheduling and transport management industry and mobile applications as well, working with Descartes products, and in his previous roles as well, working across multiple different industries. One of the things which we observe within Descartes in general is that although industries such as building supplies have some very specific requirements and items which make them somewhat different on the surface to other industries, in general there is a lot of learning and a lot of commonality and more than you might on the surface think across industries. And you said Alistair's reference to e-commerce and so on in there. There's a lot of learning that can be shared across industries. So I'll hand over to Albert here and let him pick up on his presentation this morning, and then at the end we'll have some further questions and address any remaining questions at the end. Okay, Albert, do you want to take control?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. I would like to start with an example from one of our existing clients. It's a company called BC Sense. They're a smallish building and landscaping product supplier based in Australia, in the Sydney area to be precise. They've been in business for nearly 35 years now, having about 30 plus vehicles, ranging from heavy goods vehicles to tippers, crane vehicles, etc. There's a couple of pictures on the screen as well right now. Employing about 50 people and doing roughly 150 to 200 deliveries per day. So comparable to a large branch from SIG. The reason why I want to start with this company is that although it's a small business, they're quite innovative with the type of services they offer to their customers. And I thought the best way to demonstrate or to highlight that is it's by just looking on their website. So I just took a page from their frequently asked questions, and it really shows their commitment on one hand to customer service, and on the other hand also to have competitive pricing, and how they feel see their market space and how they want to serve their customers. So this is an example of one of the questions on there. It's like, what days do you deliver? Well, they actually offer 7 days a week. Especially now, spring is coming, especially for the landscaping business. That's peak time for them. However, May, August, which for them is of course winter time, then it quiets down. That's when they offer 6 days a week. And standard, they can do a next day delivery, including then deliveries on the Sunday as well. And how soon can they deliver? Well, actually, and this really shows their focus also on customer service, is that they ask the customers, when do you want it? And what they say is in most cases, they can actually do same-day deliveries. So although they're in building materials, they've organized their operations around, deliveries within the next few hours. But that's not just it. It's not always same-day deliveries. They can also do timed deliveries, but a time and a date that actually suits the client. Alistair mentioned it before. Of course, in this industry, a lot of customers wanted the first drop, but it doesn't mean they actually need it at 7 o'clock in the morning, actually the first stop on the route. The project might not start until noon or just 1 o'clock. So delivering between 10 and 12 might be good enough. Just to be clear, because to be sure that the goods are delivered on time, they will ask you for the first drop. Well, BC Sense is able to offer the customers a specific time delivery, so customers don't always need to ask for the first drop. At the same time, I mentioned it as well about pricing, they offer something as a discounted delivery service where they do the more traditional 24 to 48 hour next day, the day after delivery service as well. And that's what we see in the next one as well, is they offer discounts to the customers. So they have a drive to push the customers onto their online website. One of the questions was about e-commerce, and this is something that BC Sense does as well. They take orders over the phone, over the traditional ways, even using fax, emails, etc. But they try to nudge the customers to order online, because that offers them savings, and they can pass that on to their customers. And the second way they pass savings on to the customers is when it comes to these discounted deliveries, or the off-peak delivery means they will tell the customers that if we can avoid peak hour congestion, so not having to deliver during the busy hours early in the morning or maybe late afternoon, we can actually plan more efficient and time-saving routes, and they'll pass that saving on to their customers. And what I like about this one is that you can see they have their focus on high customer service, but at the same time being able to offer, if they allow a bit more flexibility from the customers, also being able to have very competitive pricing. And if we look at what their customers are actually saying, so that's the next page here about the testimonials is, you know, what you offer, does it resonate well with their clients? And this is one of the testimonials on the site, is that the customers say, you know, it's an efficient and reliable service and at the same time competitively priced. And that's really something you really want to hear, right? So it's reliable, they deliver when they agree to, but again, it is a good, it's not too expensive, it's competitively priced for that one. Another customer that is more focused on service, say they really evaluate the on-time delivery, where it's easy to plan around your day. So again, you know, if you're doing multiple constructions here for different sites, you want to start at a certain time. So you got to make sure that the products are there on time. So they can plan around it by having the time deliveries and at the same time having an SMS service that will update the clients about the progress of the delivery. It's planned between 8 and 10. The vehicle left, we expect to be there between 10 and 10:30. And then 15 minutes, 30 minutes before the actual arrival time, they get another text message saying, hey, we are on our way. And the next one, a bit Australian, but starting with so bloody efficient. A lot of text in there, but it does capture it quite well. This customer was saying, you know, it's efficient, it's easy to use on the website, and it's very informative and helpful. They delivered when you said you would. So again, showing the reliability of the service. It's a great way to do business. We're not wasting any time. Right, you can really plan around. The customer doesn't take too much time having to deliver. And actually, because it's online at the building site, they can use their phone, they can use the tablet, and start ordering if they're actually missing products. A good thing is about receipts from the email. We talked about it, Alistair talked about it a bit earlier about proof of delivery, especially paperwork on building sites. It gets damaged, it gets lost. Right, being able to send it by email if goods are actually received, the invoice, etc. It's very valuable for their customers. And it's also mentioned in this one, they had some trouble, in this case, with payments. But in the end, that was solved, wasn't a problem, and very satisfied. And it shows again that, you know, reorganizing your business, using different technology, different innovations, doesn't mean that problems and errors and failures don't happen, but that you're more able to respond to them. As Alistair said before, you know, it's not just about, you know, extinguishing fires. If half the fires are caused by the way you actually work, you don't really have time to fix the fires that are really important. Really the errors that happens with the customer. And these guys have time to really fix it for the customers. And in the end, if you solve it, you know, the customer is happy, the customer is satisfied, and you can move on. And actually, you can look this one up at the website as well. You can't think of it as well. Is that one of the customers actually comparing doing business with BC Sense as, you know, ordering a pizza? It's quick and it's excellent stuff. And I've never heard that analogy when it comes to building supplies. And I really think what they mean here is you can go onto the website, you can just click the products you want, you can pay for it, and you can even have it delivered in the next few hours, right? And that is really one of their unique differentiators compared to their competitors. Well, if we look at the wider market, if you step back a little bit, is that what we have seen is that in Europe, European-wide, the outlook for the building industry and the building supply is actually positive. There is growth now after quite a few years of slow growth and no growth in the markets. Over the last year, it's grown European-wide about 4%. Even margins are increasing. However, there's still, you know, a lot of pressure in the supply chain on increased prices there, and a lot of builders are struggling with finding enough labor or finding skilled subcontractors as well, which actually could be an additional opportunity also, I believe, for building suppliers. And we'll go back there, discuss that a little bit later. Although the outlook is positive, there's of course some uncertainty in the market, developments within Europe, in the UK, and Spain, but also international, that for select markets could mean that that it's going to slow down. But generally, the outlook still so far is quite positive. If we look at the things that are changing now over the market, and we spoke about a few of them as well, is that inner city deliveries which add complexity to your logistics. More and more move to the cities that will have more building sites there. For instance, the gig economy as well, where it's more and more small one-person business, the white man in a van. How you're going to deliver to those, how you're going to cater to those kind of customers. When we look at the competitive market space, a lot of new entries, companies that until a few years ago were never considered to be a direct competitor of yours. The emergence of the merging of the B2C and the B2B markets as well. E-commerce that is playing a part in that as well, and also the blurring. Companies that focus on one type of product are becoming more and more one-stop shop. Alistair mentioned that as well. Sometimes for a project you need to take items in stock that you normally don't carry, and we see that typically happening more and more. Now we talked a little bit about labor skills and qualifications. Of course, in your end, it's always a bit difficult to find driver shortages. So how can you use your staff, your people, as efficiently and good as possible? And at the same time, the digitization of the whole industry when it comes to BIM and more supply chain integration also tends to change the relationship between a supplier or wholesaler and the actual builder as well. So what does it mean for your own specific business? So there's 4 areas I would like to highlight here. It's about building flexibility within your organization, being able to deliver where, when, and how the customer wants it. Being able to respond to the customer, exceeding that service expectation, having the data, that information available. That's important. Quality to be able to deliver one time and on time, as Alistair mentioned as well. You don't want to do redeliveries. That's extremely costly for you as a business, but also very frustrating for your customers. And being able to be more efficient, to do more with less. The market is growing. Can you find enough drivers? If you plan them more efficiently, you can have that growth. As an example, right here, I've taken this from one of our customers called the Home Depot in the US. Traditionally a DIY store, but catering more and more into the B2B market as well. And if you go onto the website and start ordering your goods, typically standard you would get a delivery the next day, 6 to 8, a full day. But if your customer, if you want to change it, you can click on change. You can pick your own specific delivery day as well. And at the same time, they also offer additional service, like for instance, for timed deliveries. Here's an example of a 4-hour delivery window where you can pick on the day at a specific time you want, or even 2-hour delivery windows as well. In their case, they charge extra for it, different from BC Send, where they give a discount if you let them decide the delivery time. In the case of the Home Depot, they will actually charge for that additional service. But you as a customer, you can actually pick when you want it. If it's something you want to do, you'll pay extra for it. And as you can see here, you allow the flexibility for the customer to determine where does it need to be delivered to, or when does it need to be delivered to, and also how does it need to be delivered? What kind of delivery service? Is it just delivery at the gates, or do we have to go drop it into the building on the different floors, maybe do unpacking, etc. as well? All these additional services that are very valuable for your customers as well. Now, the second thing, if we look at more exceeding the responsiveness and exceeding the service expectations, here I've got an example of being able to keep your customers in the loop. They've ordered something, the vehicle is on its way, you can push out a text message, or you can also use a more interactive way, like you see on the right hand with Glimpse, where you can actually, when the driver is on its way, you can push out the notification to your customer saying, hey, we're arriving, we're going to be there in 5 minutes. And they can actually view where the vehicle is heading. And the advantage of this is that you can actually make your operations more efficient as well. So what we typically see is it improves your turnaround time, stop time, security. They can make the path clear as well because they know the vehicle is going to arrive over the next few minutes. As well, when it comes to order accuracy and quality, one of the things that we can help with is loading and unloading of the vehicle, checking what's actually on the vehicle, making sure that when you deliver something, it's actually being offloaded at the customer site, so you don't make any errors of just leave a pallet or a couple of boxes of goods onto the vehicle. But also very important, if the goods can't be loaded on the vehicle, you can register it and you can also notify your customers in advance, saying, we're terribly sorry, you've booked this with us, but unfortunately it's not loaded, but we will ship it right quickly after that. Something you can then plan as well. And the last point here that I wanted to make is about efficiency. We talked about, Alistair talked about it quite a bit. The 10% savings on, for instance, kilometers and miles, typically we see 10 to 15%, depending on the number of stops and the type of operation. But I think more important as well is it frees up time for the driver, allowing the driver to either do some additional services, not just dropping it at the gate, but also delivering or distributing on site, or being able to do 1 or 2 extra stops per day. The same thing happens in the back office, freeing time from the planners, don't have to spend from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening creating the solution, but to be able to do it more efficiently and more quicker, and really focus on servicing their customers as good as possible. And last point here, and this is what we've seen with one of our other customers, is that the turnaround time at the depot, the information that we gather and push out to the customers, you can also use that internally to, for instance, inform your DC about when the vehicle is going to be back, so they can start prepping all the goods at the loading dock, just before the vehicle arrives, so it can be loaded and it can leave again. Again, freeing up time within your operations. Just as a summary, I believe that the wider building market is still a very positive outlook. There might be some uncertainty in the midterm, but so far it looks good. There's a lot of changes happening in the market when it comes to the building market, the use of BIM, to the use of the relationship between the supplier and the builder. Got to move from being just a supplier into more of a partner in that one. Innovation, I believe, looks at the flexibility of your operations. How do you respond for the customers to improve customer service? And also when errors are made, how quickly can you solve them? The quality and the efficiency of the planning. And in the example of BC Sands, we've seen that you can compete both on a high service level and the cost, the competitive pricing. Okay. Paul, are there any questions?
Okay, thank you, Albert. Thank you for that. And yeah, there's a couple more questions here, just a little bit conscious of the time. There's question for Alistair, and then there's one at the end here, which I'll take also for yourself, Albert, but I'll combine, there's 3 questions or so here, I'll try and combine into one for Alistair. And really, I think the core of the question, Alistair, is as you look at the project within SIG, what would you say is the key driver from a business perspective, the key sort of benefit or driver for that project? And then the second aspect of the question is also in terms of the standardization, which is clearly important at the branch level. Any pointers to people as to how you influence or encourage the standardization at the branch level to encourage adoption. So two aspects of that question. One is the key driver of benefit, and the other pointers to people to how do you improve standardization of approach at the branch level.
Sure. Okay. Well, in terms of the benefit, I mean, obviously, with projects like this, you've got to build a business case. So the key benefit we put in was cost reduction, because we knew we could get more out of our transport. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we did. We did budget essentially a 10% reduction in transport costs overall, partly through the transport scheduling, but also because of ways of working change, ways of working culture change, which is all part of the overall supply chain project. There wasn't a separate individual business case just for the transport planning, because we knew that just putting in a system without the other work wouldn't actually deliver the change that was necessary. So that relates, I think, to the second part of the question, which was kind of how do you try and get that sort of standardization? And I suppose there, what we were trying to do, I suppose, was almost sort of two things. One is get a sort of a much wider understanding of people to open their eyes to what happens in other places, and make them realise that firefighting and solving problems is a lot worse than avoiding the problems in the first place. So there was a whole sort of education piece in a way. And I suppose the second part of that was really trying to work out and help people understand that we weren't about to say, you've all got to have standard products in every single branch. We were understanding what needs to be a local decision by the branch, but what can be a standard way of doing things. So, how you exactly deal with the customer in your relationship with the customer, of course, make that a local thing. That's your own relationship. But when you're taking an order, for goodness sake, take an order thoroughly, professionally, in a timely way on a system, and that will give the best service, and that should be consistent. So that was kind of the sort of the approach we aimed to take. As I say, I think frankly the biggest issue in SIG was a consequence of not doing things, and there did not seem to appear to be really the willingness at sort of mid-management level to confront people and say, this isn't acceptable. We work in this way. If you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. But that ultimate sanction just didn't seem to be there, which meant it did slow down a huge amount the adoption of these good things.
And also, just another aspect of that, was there any approach in terms of incentivizing, sort of the branch workers there, in the sense of, either bonus or reward or prize, in terms of that approach to it as well, or not? Was that?
There was a lot of sort of visual feedback and the individual things. You could there was something called a Values in Practice VIP award. So sometimes people were nominated if they were really good champions of change and so on. In terms of actually a formal bonus in terms of their sort of pay packet, well, for the branch manager has a bonus that depends on his branch profitability. So you would have thought, if we're giving a branch the tools to sell better, give a better service and reduce costs, you'd think they would grasp it. But as I say, the culture was really quite strange in many ways. So to some extent, at the high level, at the more senior level, there were, it was totally consistent with their bonus. We didn't need to put a separate bonus on top of that. At the lower level, again, the reward was you should find life is a bit easier and smoother running. And certainly, some branches, some individuals really got it and said in feedback, my goodness, it is so different in the branch. We're getting things right. Things are under control. But it was very, very variable branch by branch. So, so the answer is no formal additional bonus scheme was added as a reward for doing what we wanted people to do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Alistair. And we're just a little bit over the time here, so we'll bring that to a close here now. But thanks again to both Albert and Alistair for their contributions and presentations here this morning. Some great insights, I think, into this industry and this part of the industry, its challenges, and how you apply the solutions and the benefits that they can bring here. So thank you again for that, and some great questions. As I mentioned at the beginning, the session has been recorded. It will be available on the same link as you used to come in and view it this morning. We'll also put it on to the Descartes website if you lose this link, or if you want to come back to it later. It will be on the Descartes website. So we will finish up there. Thank you very much to Alistair and to Albert, and enjoy the rest of the day. Good morning.